Hi crafty friends, it's Donna here from Donna is Playing Paper, and I have a set of 20 cards for you today using the Blush Pink Christmas paper pack. Today's cards are Christmas cards and they use this pack, but the card sketches that I've used today, as well as the really general nature of the designs that I picked, mean that you could do this with any pack for any occasion. This pack has 18 sheets in it, all double-sided, and I'm going to be using mostly the B sides, that is, the second row of papers that I laid out. As well as that, I've grabbed a few pieces of card in similar tones but darker shades, and I'm going to use those as background layers. Before I get started on the cards proper, I'm going to slice up 2 sheets of the paper. One with all of these sentiments, and a second one which has a whole lot of tags and also some bonus sentiments. Once they're sliced up, I'll just cut off the corners of the tags with my scissors. I'll pop all those aside to use as we go through the cards. I'm using some card sketches from the Operation Write Home Sketches by Sandy Allnock, and today I'm going to be working through sketches 51 to 60. These sketches are made for American sizing, and so I'm going to convert them. But if you want to use the original sizing, it's all there on the sheet as well. This conversion chart is over on my blog, and I will leave a link to it in the description box below. But basically, I'm going to stretch the card to make it slightly longer and thinner so that it works with metric sized papers, which are used, as far as I can see, everywhere in the world except the USA. I'll show you an example of how I do this for the first card, and then after that I've just written the measurements onto the sketch so that you can use those without doing the maths yourselves. This first card has a long strip across it, which is 5.5 inches long by 2 inches wide. That 5.5 inches is on the red side of my chart, and that will be 148 millimeters, which is the whole length of the card. The 2 inches is going to be the height of that strip, and that's on the short side of the card. So we'll move to the right hand column, find the 2 inches, and you can see there that that comes to 49 millimeters. So 148 millimeters by 49 millimeters is the measurement that I'll use for that strip on my card. Where the element is a square, I will keep it as a square, so I'll take something that's easy to cut, that's kind of an average between the left and the right hand side column. And right up on this first sketch is where I'm going to make the first change. Originally I'd come up with an 85 millimeter square. In order to do that, I'm going to have to cut that from 2 different sheets of paper and waste a lot of paper. So in the end, I decided to go with 75 millimeters, which is exactly half of one of these pieces of paper. The square is a little bit smaller, but then I'm going to add a background paper behind that, and it will stretch it out to size. And that way, I'll have more paper left at the end. As well as the different elements that I've made measurements for, I'm going to cut those background papers that we saw. And I cut those 3 millimeters, or if you're cutting in inches, about 1/8 of an inch bigger. That way, I'll have about 1.5 millimeters all the way around, and it just gives a really nice fine border that breaks up different busy prints. Because there are a lot of layers, I tend to use mostly things that will stick flat, like glue or double-sided tape. First, I'll glue each piece of patterned paper to its background and then construct the card. And I'm just eyeballing where these different elements will go on the card. When it comes to sticking down this square, the bottom of it is going to hang off that strip and it will wobble. And so I'm putting 2 layers of card to correspond with the 2 layers of patterned paper behind that so that it will sit nice and straight. I'm going to have to do the same for this circle, only this time it needs 4 layers down to the actual card base and only 2 layers down to that blue strip. And so the way that I do that is to build up a couple of layers at the bottom first, and then add some semicircles to the back of my circle before gluing the whole thing down. That way it will all sit really flat, nothing will wobble and nothing will peel off easily. You'll notice in all of the photos that I've added gems to most of these cards, and I'll show that a little bit at the end and tell you why I've done that. For the second card, I'm going to add in one more colour of cardstock, which is this silver shimmer cardstock. And I'm also going to use this Merry Christmas die, although you could use one of the sentiments from the pack. I've cut the sentiment in 2 layers for each of the cards, which means altogether I've cut 4 Merries and 4 Christmases, and I'm going to layer those together in pairs for the 2 cards. This sketch has a background which is direct stuck onto the background, and then this strip that runs vertical has still got a nice even base to it, so I don't need to prop anything up. I've cut all the circles for today's cards using a set of circle dies, which I will link below. But these circles are going to need to be propped up on both sides with enough height that the sides are level with that silver cardstock. I'm then going to add some teeny tiny dots to the back of my doubled up sentiment, and for the first card I'm using the fact that I'm making 2 cards to my advantage by having a spare sentiment available to use as a placeholder. Two things of note for this next card. Firstly, I'm adding a photo of the sketch in the top left-hand corner because my camera moved a little bit and cut off some of the measurements. So hopefully this way you can see the full sketch. I've done this for a couple of the sketches where the camera moved. And the second thing is that I'm choosing to use this sketch sideways. I have these beautiful tags and I think they'll just work a lot better on a vertical panel. To construct the tags, I'm cutting out the hole and adding from the deep, dark recesses of my crafting supplies a little split pin and also some twine. I'm wrapping the twine around the split pin enough that it's not going to go anywhere, and then tying a little knot in it. Once again, I've stuck the background layers directly to my card base, and I'm adding my panel. And then I'm going to use this giant roll of foam tape to give a little bit of dimension to the tag. I'm also going to give the string just a little bit of help in knowing how to sit by adding a tiny dab of glue right behind the knot. As with every card in this series, I've made 2 cards using this design. This 4th sketch for today, number 55, gives us another idea of a way that we can stretch a sketch. And that is, where there's a circle element, it doesn't necessarily need to be just a circle. For today's card, I've chosen to cut out some baubles. I'm going to give these Christmas ornaments some dimension by running them through with an embossing folder and then add the little cutout bow to the top. The construction of this card is almost identical to the last card. The only difference here is that instead of propping up the Christmas ornament, I've just used foam tape for the whole ornament and kept the foam tape away from where that vertical strip is, so that the whole ornament will sit nice and level. My sentiment comes from the Merry Christmas sentiment sheets, and I've chosen the one that's embossed with silver. There are also gold and rose gold in this pack, as well as black on white. One of the sheets in this paper pack is full of elements that you can fussy cut, but I didn't want to do that much fussy cutting for these Christmas cards, and so I've used the reverse side of that, and instead just cut a few of the elements from a couple of the tags. Once again, this sketch had me stick a bunch of papers to my card base. I wonder whether this set of designs all had the same designer. Next, I've added my panel, and I'm just going to pop up a sentiment which I've backed with some blue paper and a little element for the cards. This is the first card where the two cards were not identical, but that's going to happen more and more as I start to run low on paper. I've tried to do something just a little bit different with each of the sketches so that there's something new for new card makers in each of them. And for this card, I've made a background which is already 3mm smaller than the card. That means that as I cut the different elements for this card, if I want to get the same look, I'm going to cut each of them to be 3mm smaller than the measurement that I wrote on the card. So you can see that I've written on the sketch all minus 3mm. And that's how I made that little blue indented border and yet still had my final card look the same as the sketch. The layering isn't anything you haven't seen before, so I'm not going to talk about that for this card. Here we are at our 7th sketch, number 57, and while I'm not running out of paper yet, I'm definitely thinking about how I'm going to make my papers last for another 8 cards. And I have a strip of paper that's just slightly too narrow to use on this right hand side. It's 5mm shorter than what I really need for this side, and I'm going to add those 5mm to those dark blue squares on the left and just change the measurements very slightly. As you'll see in the end, my card does look slightly different to the sketch, but it's still very nice, and it's meant that I can leave some papers intact for the next 6 cards. Okay, just 3 sketches to go for my 10 sketches, which means I need to get 6 cards. And the middle sketch here, number 59, has the biggest pieces to it, and so I'm actually going to think about that one first, because the other 2 cards have lots and lots of small squares which I can grab from the very smallest of the scraps. Here's another one of my top tips for getting the most from a 6x6 paper pad, and that is to even use the cover. This cover has some beautiful 2-inch tall strips, most of which are 1 inch wide, that I can use. And so I'm going to slice those up and then cut them down into 1-inch squares. One of the strips was a little wider and one a little narrower, so I had to throw one out and I had to take a little smidge off one of those strips. But I got a bunch of small squares from cutting that up, and I've put those aside while I make sketch number 59. Another thing that you can do to stretch your papers at the end is to just pretend to have a strip going across. You can do this right from the start if you like and save a lot of paper as you go, but it is a bit more of a fiddle, and when I'm making 20 cards I don't necessarily have the time to stop like that for every card. I'm using foam tape, and I've put that only where that little strip isn't so that it will sit nice and flat. I've taken this small Merry Christmas and then mounted it up onto some blue card, but it still looked a little small and a little lost, so I double mounted it, going with a white cardstock behind that again for the sentiment on these cards. Alright, on to the last 2 cards, and I've tried to think of a couple of other techniques to make these sketches look special and to give some more ideas of things that you can do. Once again, I've had to split my strip and hide the gap in it to make the papers stretch. This sketch has 3 1-inch squares, and I want to turn these into shiny tiles. The glossy accents that I'm going to use here can make the paper warp a bit, and that's why I used those foam sheets that I could cut to almost exactly the same size, just a smidge smaller than each of these squares, so that they were well adhered all the way to almost the edge. That way, when I put on the glossy accents and wait for it to dry, I won't have too much warping. These look a little bit milky when you first put it on and as they dry, but once they're dry, they come up as beautiful shiny tiles. the final sketch, I did have enough paper to do a patterned paper background, and then I've added the 9 tiles. I only had one small Merry Christmas sentiment. That one came from the front cover of this pack. And you could make all of these into tiles, but I decided to just put the glossy accents on the sentiment for these cards. The second card is slightly different, with a different shaped sentiment, because I had run out. There we go, we've made it to 20 cards from one card pack. Just before I show you the leftovers, I'm just going to show you what I do with the glossy accents. For a long time I had trouble with it clogging up, and I've realised now that I really do need to clean out the nozzle before I put the cap on. So I let the glue settle, and then I give it a good squeeze into a paper towel or rag to really empty out the nozzle. I double check that with a pin before putting the cap on, and that's really helped. Now I'm on a mission to clean out some of my old crafting supplies, and I found all of these stick-on jewels at the bottom of a tub, and so I've chosen a few in the colours that are on these cards and stuck them all over the cards in the hope of using some up. Here's the leftovers. Honestly, there's enough for a few more cards, but the energy ran out before the paper did. Here's a look at the cards that we made today. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you're getting some time to be crafty. Feel free to like or subscribe, and I'll be back soon with some more card making. Bye for now.